Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. There we go. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Ehud in South Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Jonathan in Southern California, Karen in Northern California, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Ella, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Come on, Facebook. Okay, so today is Gimel Tammuz, the third day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz, and that is the yard site of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Picture of him back there. And although Nina and I are not Chabadniks, we are very, very much grateful to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Chabad movement, and inspired by the Rebbe and his shluchim, his emissaries, the incredible movement that he started to bring Chabad rabbis to every corner of the world. A Jew is traveling, a Jew is looking for a place to pray, for some kosher food, for some good company, a way to learn Torah, almost anywhere in the world. It was an incredible plan, an incredible project that the Rebbe kicked into gear, and that has just continued to flower and blossom. So incredible. A good friend of ours, Rabbi Reuven Wolf, here in LA, been friends with him for years, watched his kids grow up, and his older son now is a Chabad rabbi, and he and his young wife just got married. They've taken on shlichus. They're going to be, Chabad emissaries, open a Chabad house in Fairbanks, Alaska. I believe it's going to be the northernmost Chabad in the world. And what Mesiras Nefesh, I mean, what an amazing thing. They're living here in the lap of warmth and fun and comfort in Southern California, and they're going to take a lifelong post, right? It's a lifelong position in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I'm sure there's really an incredible life to be led in Alaska, but it's not so easy. I mean, I believe in the winter, daylight is like 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., something like that. And, it's just a kind of cold that I think we just don't understand living down here in Southern California. But they're going up there and they're going to make themselves available to any Jews that might be living in Fairbanks, and we honor them. So we dedicate our learning today to Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who left the world 30 years ago today. May the neshama have an aliyah. I mean, his position in the world to come is the most exalted. I'm sure he's right up there with Moses and Rabbi Akiva, learning and teaching Torah. But we just want to express our gratitude and appreciation to the Rebbe. Okay, our daf today is page 14, Yud Dalet, here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 1. And we're actually, where am I? So we got a good start. We're about halfway down page 14a, a little more than halfway down page 14a. and we'll get into page 15 as well today. It's not a double daf, but we got ahead and we want to stay a little bit ahead. As I mentioned yesterday, we'll have no class on Monday and Wednesday of next week when I'll be traveling for the Maccabeah Games qualifier that I'm coaching in. Okay, so we picked this up, like I said, a little more than halfway down the page on 14a. So the Baraisa that we've been talking about, what are the proper dimensions of a Torah scroll, and we learned that more or less the height, right, of the parchment, from bottom to top of the parchment, that length should be about the same as the circumference of the Torah scroll when it is rolled up, and we've been exploring that concept a little bit. And yesterday we started to talk about the Ark of the Covenant that was constructed in the wilderness, as we read in the Torah, that the children of Israel, right, under Moses' supervision, Bezalel, the craftsman, constructed many things, including the Ark that was made of wood and covered in gold, beaten out sheets of gold with the two cheruvim, right, the images of the angels on top. And what was carried in there, and what were its dimensions. And when we think about what was in there and what the dimensions were of what was in there, namely the tablets of the Ten Commandments and the original Torah scroll written by Moses, and that it was a nice snug fit in the Ark, we might learn a little bit more about the dimensions, or maybe the ideal dimensions of a Torah scroll. So the Baraisa that we were learning continues. Now with this explanation, where we finished off yesterday about how the two tablets were laid in the Ark and then the Torah scroll. So with this explanation, you have accounted for the length of the Ark. Go now and account for the width of the Ark, which was 9 handbreadths. So how much space did the tablets of the Ten Commandments occupy of the width of the Ark, which was 9 handbreadths wide? Answer, 6 handbreadths. Therefore, 3 handbreadths were left there along the width of the Ark. Deduct a handbreadth from them, 1/2 for the thickness of this wall and 1/2 for the thickness of that wall. Accordingly, 2 handbreadths were left there. And what was their purpose? These were necessary so that the Torah scroll would be able to go in and out without having to be pressed. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, that there needed to be a little slack inside the Ark of the Covenant, so you could put the tablets and the Torah, and everything wasn't like pressed together. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says that the cubit used for all the measurements of the Ark was not 6 handbreadths, but rather 5 handbreadths. Therefore, the Ark was 12 1/2 handbreadths long, 7 1/2 handbreadths wide, and 7 1/2 handbreadths high. 7 1/2 handbreadths high. And as for the tablets, their length was 6 handbreadths, their width was 6 handbreadths, and their thickness was 3. And they were placed along the length of the Ark, one next to the other. If so, how much space did the tablets occupy along the length of the Ark? 12 handbreadths, so that only 1/2 a handbreadth was left there, which is 2 finger breadths, right? This is a handbreadth, so what's 1/2 a handbreadth? 2 finger breadths. Where am I? 1/2 a handbreadth was left here, which is 2 finger breadths. So 1 finger breadth of those 2 was for the thickness of this wall, and 1 finger breadth was for the thickness of the other wall. Well, so how thick were the walls of the covenant? Were they 1 finger width wide? Were they 2 fingers? Was it a full handbreadth? Now, with this explanation, you have accounted for the entire length of the Ark. Go and account for the width of the Ark, which was 7 1/2 handbreadths. Well, how much space did the tablets occupy in the Ark? 6 handbreadths. We know the dimensions of the tablets, meaning 1 1/2 handbreadths were left there along the width of the Ark. So deduct 1/2 a handbreadth and 1 1/2 finger breadths for the thickness of this wall and 1 1/2 finger breadths for the thickness of the other wall. So accordingly, 1 handbreadth was left there, in which the silver columns were placed on either side of the tablets. As it is stated, King Solomon made himself a palanquin of the timbers of Lebanon. He made its columns of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. From the Song of Songs 3, 9, and 10. And this is understood as an allusion to the Ark of the Covenant. And the chest in which the Philistines sent the gift to the God of Israel was placed alongside the ark. Right, when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant in an ill-advised war that we lost. Right? We shouldn't have gone to that war. We lost that war against the Philistines, and they captured the Ark of the Covenant. But the Ark of the Covenant, was not meant to reside among the Philistines, and immediately a plague broke out, and they were starting to die. And they realized that they should not be keeping this Ark of the Covenant of the Jews, and they just sent it back in an unaccompanied wagon. So imagine the Ark of the Covenant, perhaps the holiest object on earth, was just going down the road in a wagon pulled by, I can't remember if it was an ox or a donkey, unaccompanied by people, and it just walked all the way back into Israel. And they sent a gift along with it saying, leave us alone. They wanted to appease the God of Israel so that plague would end. So, and the chest in which the Philistines sent the gift to the God of Israel was placed alongside the ark, as it is stated, and put the golden devices which you are restoring to him for a guilt offering in a chest by the side of it, and send it away that it may go. From Samuel 6:8. And upon this chest lay the Torah scroll, as it is stated, take this Torah scroll and put it at the side of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. Deuteronomy 31:26. And this means that it was placed at the side of the ark and not inside it. You don't have to keep all of this straight, the dimensionality and exactly the layout of the objects inside the ark. The point is, when they finish this Baraisa, they're going to say, well, how big was that Torah scroll? That's where we're headed. So accordingly, how do I realize the meaning of that which is stated? There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone, which Moses put there, which according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, teaches that something else was in the ark besides the tablets themselves. And it serves to include, and now we're on page 14b, the broken pieces of the first set of tablets which Moses smashed against the ground when he saw the people dancing around the golden calf. And the broken tablets were also placed inside the ark. Now, all of that Baraisa from another place in the Talmud, which was meant to say what the dimensions of the ark were and what was inside it, now we're getting to the point. So having cited this Baraisa, the Gemara now presents its objection to what was taught earlier with regard to the dimensions of a Torah scroll. And if it should enter your mind to say, as Rebbe held, that the circumference of a Torah scroll is 6 handbreadths, now, since any cylindrical object having a circumference of 3 handbreadths has a diameter of 1 handbreadth, is the relationship between the diameter of a circle and the circumference of that circle, is the relationship between the circumference of a circle and its diameter 3-to-1? Where are my mathematicians? No, it's pi, right? 3.141589, whatever it is. It's an irrational number that the decimal keeps extending out to infinity. But is 3.14 pretty, to 1, pretty similar to 3-to-1? Yeah, so that's what they're saying. They're just keeping it as whole numbers. But the basic relationship between the circumference of a circle and its diameter is about 3-to-1, a little bit more than 3-to-1. So that's what they're saying. Right, and now, since any cylindrical object having a circumference of 3 handbreadths has a diameter of 1 handbreadth, a Torah scroll with a circumference of 6 handbreadths should have a diameter of 2 handbreadths. And since a Torah scroll is wound to the middle, meaning it's on 2 dowels, like I showed you yesterday, not just one, it doesn't have 1 pole in the middle, it has 2 poles, and the roll goes from one to the other pole, so there are 2 poles in a Sefer Torah, which would therefore take up more space, right? The roll Torah with its two rolls pressed together, that's going to end up having a larger diameter than if it was all rolled around 1 pole. And since the Torah scroll is wound to the middle, meaning it's rolled from both sides, so it must take up more than 2 handbreadths due to the space between the sheets of parchment and the double rolling around 2 poles. So according to Rabbi Meir, who says that the Torah scroll was placed inside the Ark of the Covenant, how did the scroll fit in the remaining 2 handbreadths of space that were left in the Ark after we've been through all these calculations? It seems like the Torah scroll shouldn't fit. And Rav Acha bar Yaakov said the scroll of the temple courtyard, which was kept in the Ark, was wound to its beginning, meaning wound around a single pole, not the way we usually see a Torah wound around 2 poles. And the Gemara asks, but still, how does an item that is 2 handbreadths wide fit into a space that is precisely 2 handbreadths? It would be impossible to fit it in. And Rav Ashi said, a small section of the scroll was wound separately and then placed on top of the scroll. If indeed it was a perfect fit, they wouldn't wind the entire Torah. They would leave some of it unwound. It fits into the slot. And then that last bit gets just wound by itself and lays on top, right? They leave out just enough so that the diameter will be a little bit narrower. It can fit into the space that's left between the tablets and the wall of the ark. And then they, add that little bit of parchment on top. Now, having concluded its current discussion, the Gemara now addresses the details of that aforementioned Baraisa and asks, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Torah scroll rested on the chest that came from the Philistines with their gift, where was the Torah scroll placed before the chest arrived? If it was lying on the chest inside the ark, but that chest wasn't added till hundreds of years, many hundreds of years, after Moses wrote the Torah in the wilderness, so then what was the Torah scroll, the original Torah scroll, resting on? And the Gemara answers, there was a shelf that protruded from the side of the ark, and the Torah scroll rested on it. So interesting, it could have just lay on top of the tablets, but I guess it was considered disrespectful for the Torah scroll to lay on top of the tablets of the 10 commandments. So it actually lay on a little shelf above that. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Meir, who says that the Torah scroll rested inside the ark, what does he do with this verse? Take this Torah scroll and put it at the side of the ark in Deuteronomy 31:26. And the Gemara answers, he requires that verse to teach that the Torah scroll was placed at the side of the tablets, and that it was not placed between the 2 tablets, but it was actually placed inside the ark at the side of the tablets. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Meir, where were the silver columns placed? And the Gemara answers, outside the ark. And the Gemara asks again, and from where does Rabbi Meir derive that the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed inside the ark? As the verse from which Rebbe learns this, there was nothing in the ark except, from 1 Kings 8:9, that this is needed by Rabbi Meir to teach that the Torah scroll was placed there. Right? So if they have a different source for saying, how do we know what was in the ark besides the tablets? And was it Moses' Torah scroll, or was it the first set of broken tablets, or was it both? How do we know? So the Gemara answers, he derives this point from what Rav Huna expounded. As Rav Huna says, what is the meaning of that which is written, the ark of God, whereupon is called the name of the Lord of hosts that sits upon the cherubim, the cherubs, the 2 angels on top of the ark. This is from 2 Samuel 6:2. So the phrase, the name of the Lord, teaches that both the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark, right? Because it's repetition of the name of the Lord. Now the Gemara asks, and what does the other sage, i.e. Rebbe, derive from this verse? Rabbi Yehuda derived from this verse. So the Gemara responds, he requires that text for that which Rabbi Yochanan says. As Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, this teaches that the ineffable name of God and all his appellations were placed in the ark. Now the Gemara inquires, and doesn't the other sage, Rabbi Meir, also require it for that? And the Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so. Rather, from where does he derive that the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark? And the Gemara explains, he derives this from that which Rav Yosef taught. As Rav Yosef taught in a Baraisa, the verses state, at that time the Lord said to me, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, right? That's Moses talking. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark, right? Moses is telling us that when he went up to the mountain the second time, God said to him, now we're going to make a second set of tablets. But whereas the first set of tablets were carved, right? The stones were carved into their shape by God and inscribed by God. The second set of tablets were a partnership between Moses and God. God said to Moses, you carve the tablets, I will inscribe them, right? So this idea that the Torah sort of exists to be studied, to be learned, and therefore creates a living relationship, a kind of partnership between God and the Jews who are learning it. Which you broke, you shall put them in the ark. And this teaches that both the second set of tablets and the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark. Now, the Gemara asks, and what does the other one, meaning Rabbi Yehuda, learn from this verse? If he's not using it for that purpose, what's he using it for? So the Gemara answers, he requires it for that which Reish Lakish teaches. As Reish Lakish says, what is the meaning of that which is stated, the first tablets which you broke, Asher Shibarta, that you broke? These words allude to the fact that God approved of Moses' action, as if the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, he approved it as if he said to Moses, may your strength be straight, Yishar Kochacha, because you broke them. In other words, did God rebuke Moses for breaking the first set of tablets when he became so angry at the members, of the children of Israel who had, just panicked and started committing avodah zarah, idolatry, by dancing around that golden calf? And then Moses got down, he became so angry, and he smashed the tablets, right? And I think that this is one of the many times when God said, this people is corrupt, it's wicked, I'm going to destroy them. Moses, you'll start, you have your family and your descendants will become the Jewish people. But as for this people that I brought out of Egypt, I mean, they're really problematic people. And Moses, the great advocate for the Jewish people, over and over again, defends them and say, no, don't let it be said you brought them out here to perish. Don't let it be said that you don't care or love your people. And again, right? God rebukes the people, and in the sin of the spies condemns them all, that generation, everyone over 20, to die in the wilderness. But God also says, I have a covenant with the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sort of renewed in this relationship with Moses, and that he would never abandon the Jewish people, and though we'll suffer, we'll always be here, right? And so it's the greatest miracle that this tiny little people persecuted all over the globe for millennia is still here, when all those other great empires that were persecuting us, they're gone, right? So at any rate here, they're learning out from this verse that God approved when Moses smashed the tablets. And there's a teaching elsewhere, I forget if it's in the Midrash or the Gemara, that Moses had to do that, right? Because what he was doing, basically when the people were dancing around the golden calf, it was like they were cheating on their husband, right? Meaning the bride is the Jewish people and the husband is God. And they were cheating on the husband. And if indeed they were, committing adultery, as it were, then they would be liable to the death penalty. But when Moses smashed the first set of tablets, he said, there is no marriage, right? There is no marriage contract, right? So the people aren't obligated yet in the details of the contract, since, there it is in pieces at my feet. And God said, okay, very clever, Moses. So here's the new set, and we're going to make them together. So you have skin in the game, as it were. You're invested in these 10 commandments, the second set that you carved. They're not going to be smashed, but we're going to remember, what went wrong in the incident of the golden calf, and so we're going to keep those broken pieces in the ark as well. And we learn elsewhere that some of the suffering that has visited the Jewish people and all Jews in every generation, some measure of that is due to the residue of that, original great sin. Not the sin of Adam and Eve, but that incredibly, inexplicably devastating sin of, right in front of God who just brought us out of Egypt. The people panic. Now, they weren't really worshiping the calf. They were thinking that Moses, who was there, doing the talking between them and God, and Moses was up on that mountain for 40 days, maybe he's not coming back. They panicked at that, and they tried to build themselves an intermediary between themselves and God. But even though they weren't worshiping the calf, this whole thing was obviously way too close to avodah zarah, to idolatry, and it, resulted in, a bunch of those people who were dancing around it being killed, a plague breaking out in the camp, God being so angry, and, sort of setting the scene for many more travails to come in the wilderness. All right, let's keep going. Now that we've been talking about the scroll of a Sefer Torah, and we also were talking a little bit earlier about not just the Torah, meaning the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, but there's all the other books as well, the prophets and the writings. Could they all be attached together and rolled into one scroll? The sages said no. Rabbi Meir said yes. So now that we're talking about all the books that are contained in Tanakh, right, the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, right? the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, which comprise the Hebrew Bible. Now that we're talking about that, sort of physically what it looks like, now let's talk a little bit more about how the Hebrew Bible is organized, right? So it's a major digression that we're going on, and it is absolutely fascinating, but it doesn't have so much to do with dividing a courtyard, a garden, a field, or even a scroll of sacred writing. Now we're just talking about the composition of the Hebrew Bible. So, the sages taught the order of the books of the prophets when they are attached together is as follows: Joshua and Judges, Samuel and Kings, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Isaiah and the 12 prophets. And the Gemara says, consider, Hosea preceded some of the other prophets whose books are included in the Bible. As it is written, the Lord spoke first to Hosea. We learned that in Hosea 1:2. And at first glance, this is very difficult. But did God speak first with Hosea and not with any other prophet before him? Weren't there many prophets between Moses and Hosea? And Rabbi Yochanan says, well, he was the first of the 4 prophets who prophesied in that period, meaning Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, and Micah. So accordingly, Hosea preceded those 3 prophets, and the book of Hosea as well should precede the books of those prophets, okay? Now the Gemara answers, well, since his prophecy is written together with those of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi in one book of the 12 prophets, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were the last of the prophets, he is counted with them. So the Gemara inquires, but let the book of Hosea be written separately and let it precede the others. And the Gemara answers, were it written separately, since it is small, it would be lost, right? Hosea is a very short book. It could be lost. So it's included alongside other short books. Now the Gemara further asks, consider Isaiah preceded Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So let the book of Isaiah precede the books of those other prophets, right? Isaiah was actually earlier in time than Jeremiah, but in the Bible, Jeremiah comes first. Is that true? That's at least according to this. Is it laid out that way? Let's see. So Shoftim, Judges, then Kings, right? Then Jeremiah, and then Ezekiel, and then the 12 prophets. Wait. Where's Isaiah? Joshua, Judges, Shmuel, Kings, then Isaiah, and then Jeremiah, and then Ezekiel. Okay, so in order, Isaiah comes before Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So that's how it ended up. All right, now let's read this again. Consider. Isaiah preceded Jeremiah and Ezekiel, so let the book of Isaiah precede the books of those other prophets. The Gemara says, since the book of Kings ends with the destruction of the temple, and the book of Jeremiah deals with the destruction of the temple, and the book of Jeremiah deals entirely with the prophecies of the destruction, and the book of Ezekiel begins with the destruction of the temple but ends with the consolation of rebuilding the temple, and Isaiah deals entirely with consolation, as most of his prophecies refer to redemption. So we juxtapose destruction to destruction and consolation to consolation. And this is why, according to this Gemara, the books would be ordered Jeremiah and then Ezekiel and then Isaiah. I guess it's not the way it ended up. Now the Baraisa continues, the order of the writings is Ruth, and then Psalms, and then Job and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Lamentations, Daniel, and the scroll of Esther, right, the book of Esther, and then Ezra and Chronicles. So the Gemara asks, now let's see, did it end up that way? Let's check that. Okay, so then comes the 12 prophets. So when we get to the 12 prophets that we were just talking about, that they're in order, that's Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. Okay, that's the 12. Then after that, we go to Tehillim, Psalms. All right. Then Proverbs. Ooh. Wouldn't it be better if I just went to the table of contents? Sorry, I'm just thinking of this now. I didn't think of it before. Contents. Okay. Here we go. So after, right. So we do the Torah, then it's prophets, right? From Joshua to Judges to Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, then the 12 prophets. After that, we go to the writings, and then the writings are ordered Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles, right? So that's how Tanakh ended up being ordered. Now that's not the way it's expressed here in the Gemara. Here it says that the Baraisa said, right? Now you see that a Baraisa is not as authoritative as a Mishna. The order of the writings here is listed as Ruth, and then Psalms and Job and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Lamentations, Daniel, Esther, Ezra, and Chronicles. So the Gemara asks, and according to the one who says that Job lived in the time of Moses, Job was contemporaneous with Moses. Is that according to all opinions? Definitely not. We're going to hear a whole bunch of opinions now about when Job lived. So the first opinion says Job lived at the time of Moses. So according to that opinion, let the book of Job precede the others. If he lived at the same time as Moses, maybe Job should come before Joshua and certainly before Judges. So the Gemara answers, we do not begin with suffering, i.e. it would be inappropriate to start the section of the Bible called the Writings with a book that deals so extensively with suffering. And the Gemara asks, but the book of Ruth, with which the Writings opens, is also about suffering, since it describes the tragedies that befell the family of Elimelech. And the Gemara answers, this is suffering which has a future of hope and redemption. As you know, Ruth's progeny ended up being King David. As Rabbi Yochanan says, why was she named Ruth? We would pronounce that Ruth or Rus. Because they're descended from her, David, who stated a word with the root Resh Vav Hey, the Holy One, blessed be He, with songs and praises. Now, the Brisa considers the authors of the biblical books. And who wrote the books of the Bible? Who wrote the Bible? Obviously, multiple authors. We know that Moses wrote the Torah. He was taking dictation from God, but he's the one who wrote it down. Is that all that Moses wrote? No. And who wrote the books of the Bible? Moses wrote his own book, i.e. the Torah, and the portion of Bilam in the Torah. Isn't the portion of Bilam in the Torah? Right? I mean, that's, the story of Bilam is told in Torah portion Balak, right, which I think is next week, or the week after, I can't remember right now. So what does it mean he wrote his own book in the portion of Bilam? According to the Riaf, Moses' own book is a reference specifically to Deuteronomy. And the commentaries raise the question, if the passage of Bilam is part of the Torah, why then is it singled out for special mention? And the Ritva writes that Moses wrote an entire book about Bilam, but it has been lost. The Maharal suggests that this statement is necessary because otherwise one might have thought that Bilam's words are his own prophecy and lack the sanctity of Torah. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches that Moses wrote these words as well, and that the passage of Bilam has a status equal in sanctity to that of every other passage in the Torah. Right? Why is that important? Because Bilam was a prophet. He was not a Jew, he was a non-Jewish prophet, and he's the one that was brought by King Balak in order to curse the Jewish people. But he said, I can only do that which God tells me, and so what does he end up doing? He blesses the Jewish people. And that blessing, Ma tovu halecha Yaakov mishkanesecha Yisrael, how goodly are your tents, O Israel, your dwelling places. How goodly are your dwelling places, Jacob, your tent. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, is something that we still say, right? So it's something that a non-Jewish prophet blessed us with, and we repeat those words every day when we enter a synagogue and other times as well. So, lest you think that they're the words, of some other prophet who maybe is not a real prophet, they got, special mention of them, of Moses writing the words of Bilam is made here. And what other book did Moses write? Job, right? According to this, and the book of Job. So Moses wrote the Torah, his own book. Maybe that's the Torah, maybe that's Deuteronomy, but the Torah includes Bilam, and he also wrote Job, the book of Job. Joshua wrote his own book and 8 verses of the Torah, which describe the death of Moses, because how could Moses write about his own death? We're going to come back to that point. Samuel, wrote his own book, right, the book of Samuel, and he wrote Judges, the book of Judges, and Ruth. Samuel wrote the book of Ruth. King David, wrote the book of Psalms by means of 10 elders of previous generations, assembling a collection that included compositions of others along with his own. That's why Psalm 90, for example, is attributed to Moses, but the book of Psalms is attributed to King David. And he included Psalms authored by Adam Rishon, Adam, the first man, by Melchizedek, the king of Salem, right, Shalom, and by Abraham, as well as by Moses, and by Hay-mahn, and by Jeduthun, and by Asaph, and by the 3 sons of Korach. Again, those are part of the daily psalms in the prayer book. The psalm by the sons of Korach. I think we say that on Monday or Tuesday. The psalm of Asaph, I think we said today, right? So I think the sons of Korach, their psalm is on Monday. The psalm of Asaph is today. Now we're on 15a. Now, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, wrote his own book and the book of Kings. Right? So Jeremiah wrote the book of Jeremiah, and he wrote the book of Kings, and Jeremiah wrote Lamentations, right? Crying over the destruction of the first temple. Hizkiyahu, right? Hezekiah and his colleagues wrote the following, and the mnemonic to remember which books they wrote is Yud Mem Shin Kuf, right? So they wrote Yeshaya, that's Isaiah. Presumably Isaiah was part of this group and he wrote his own book. Mishle, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. Now, the members of the Great Assembly wrote the following, and the mnemonic to remember these books of Kuf Nun Dalet Gimel, Ezekiel and the 12 prophets, Daniel and the scroll of Esther, and Ezra wrote his own book and the genealogy of the book of Chronicles until this period. Okay, so according to that Gemara, an attribution of all those books, the Gemara comments, that's not a universal Jewish opinion at all, what we just read. But according to that view of this list of authors, so the Gemara comments, this supports Rav. As Rav Yehuda says that Rav says Ezra did not ascend from Bavel, from Babylonia, to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, until he established his own genealogy. And after that, he ascended. And this genealogy is what is written in the book of Chronicles. And who completed the book of Chronicles for the generations following Ezra? Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. So the Gemara elaborates on the particulars of this Baraisa. The master said above that Joshua wrote his own book and 8 verses of the Torah. Well, this Baraisa is taught in accordance with the one who says that it was Joshua who wrote the last 8 verses of the Torah, right? After Moses died, and it says, Moses ascended on the mountain and God took him, and the place where he was buried is not known, and there never arose a prophet in Israel like Moses, right? So that was written right after he died, that there never would arise again a prophet like Moses. And in fact, that's been true. So who wrote, could Moses have written what happened after he died? How could he write that? So it must have been Joshua, according to this view, right? And this Bryce is taught in accordance with the one who says that it was Joshua who wrote the last 8 verses of the Torah. Now, this point is subject to a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, as it is taught in a different Baraisa, quote, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. That's Deuteronomy 34:5. Now, is it possible that after Moses died, he himself wrote, and Moses died there? Rather, Moses wrote the entire Torah until this point, and Joshua wrote from this point to the end of the Torah. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. And some say Rabbi Nehemiah stated this opinion. What's the other side of the argument? Rabbi Shimon said to him, is it possible that the Torah scroll was missing a single letter? But it is written in Deuteronomy 31:26, take this Torah scroll, referring to the Torah scroll, very meta, right? Take this Torah scroll. Now this indicates that the Torah was complete, as is, and that nothing further would be added to it. So rather, until this point, the Holy One, blessed be He, dictated, and Moses repeated after him, and he wrote the text, right? Moses took dictation from God. From this point forward, where God is telling Moses, write this down, and then Moses died there, God says it, and Moses writes it down, but the difference is, from this point forward, with respect to Moses' death, the Holy One, blessed be He, dictated, and Moses wrote with tears. Now, the fact that the Torah was written by way of dictation can be seen later, as it is stated concerning the writing of the prophets, quote, from Jeremiah 36:18, and Baruch said to them, He dictated all these words to me, and I wrote them with ink in the scroll. Now the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is that which Rabbi Yehoshua bar Abba says that Rav Giddel says? That Rav says, when the Torah is read publicly in synagogue, one person reads the last 8 verses of the Torah, and that section may not be divided between 2 readers. Shall we say that this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? As according to Rabbi Shimon, these verses are an integral part of the Torah written by Moses, just like all the rest of the Torah. And the Gemara answers, even if you say that this was said in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, since they differ from the rest of the Torah in this way that Moses wrote those 8 verses with tears, so they differ from the rest of the Torah in this way as well, and they may not be divided between 2 readers, whereas other portions of the Torah, you could call up one reader and then another. Now, it is stated in the Baraisa that Joshua wrote his own book. Right? Joshua, the student and successor to Moshe, Joshua wrote his own book. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it written toward the end of the book? And Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died? So it's the same problem that we have with Moses dying at the end of the Torah. Who wrote that? Well, now Joshua dies at the end of the book of Joshua, and it's described. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. Joshua 24:29. So is it possible that Joshua wrote this? And the Gemara answers, Aaron's son, Eleazar, completed it. Right? So Eleazar became the high priest after Aaron died. So Aaron's son, Eleazar, completed it. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it also written, and Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died? And that was in Joshua 24:33. So a little bit later than when Joshua died. So who wrote that? And the Gemara answers, Pinchas completed it, right? Who was the next Kohen Gadol. It is also stated in the Baraisa that Samuel wrote his own book. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it written, quote, and Samuel died? Same problem. And the Gemara answers, Gad, the seer, and Nathan, the prophet, they finished it. So it is further stated that David wrote the book of Psalms by means of 10 elders, whom the Baraisa proceeds to list. And the Gemara asks, but then let it also count Ethan the Ezrahite among the contributors to the book of Psalms, as it is he who is credited with Psalm 89. And Rav says Ethan the Ezrahite is the same person as Abraham, our father Abraham. So proof for this is the fact that it is written here, a maskil of Ethan the Ezrahite, Psalm 89:1. And it is written there, who raised up one from the east, Mizrach, whom righteousness met wherever he set his foot. That's Isaiah 41:2. And this verse is understood as referring to Abraham, who came from the east. And for that reason, he is called Ethan the Ezrahite in the former verse, as referring to coming from the east. So the Gemara asks, the Baraisa counts Moses among the 10 elders whose works are included in the book of Psalms. And it also counts Hay-mahn. Hay-mahn, right? Hay-mahn. It's here spelled Hay-mahn, but I think it's pronounced Hay-mahn. This is not Haman from the Esther story. This is someone named Hay-mahn, right? Hay-mahn. Not Haman from the Esther story, but somebody else named Hay-mahn or Hay-mahn. Okay, but doesn't Rav say that Hay-mahn, mentioned in the Bible in 1 Kings 5:11 is the same person as Moses? And this is proven by the fact that it is written here, Hay-mahn, which is Aramaic for trusted. And it is written there about Moses, for he is the trusted one in all my house. Numbers 12:7. So the Gemara answers, there were 2 Hay-mahns, one of whom was Moses, and the other was a singer in the temple from among the descendants of Samuel. It's very different spelling than the Haman in the Esther story. Now, the Baraisa further states that Moses wrote his own book, i.e. the Torah, the portion of Balaam, and the book of Job. Now, this supports Rabbi Levi Bar Lachma, as Rabbi Levi Bar Lachma says Job lived in the time of Moses, contemporary with Moses. And it is written here with regard to Job, oh, that my words were written now, eifo. Job 19:23. And it is written there in Moses' words to God, for in what shall it be known here, eifo, right? So the one eifo is being translated as now, but it really means like present here. And the other one is being translated as here, but it's that same idea, here and now, eifo, here and now. That Moses said, I'm sorry, where am I? That Moses said, for it shall be known, for in what shall it be known, eifo, here. Now, this unusual use of the word eifo in these two places serves to link Job and Moses in the same generation. The Gemara comments, but if that is the proof, then you could say that Job lived in the time of Isaac, many hundreds of years earlier, as it is written in connection with Isaac, who then, eifo, is he that has taken venison, right? When Isaac is talking about his son, when Esau comes to get a blessing and he says, well, I already gave you your blessing when you brought me venison before. Who is it that has brought me venison? Here, eifo. Who then, eifo, has taken venison? Or say that Job lived during the time of Jacob, as it is written with respect to Jacob, if it must be so now, eifo, do this in Genesis 43:11. Or you could say that Job lived in the time of Joseph, as it is written with respect to Joseph. Tell me, I pray you, where, eifo, are they feeding their flocks? Right, when he went looking for his brothers and he found the man in Shechem. Now the Gemara answers, it could not enter your mind to say this, as it is written in the continuation of the previously mentioned verse. Oh, that my words were inscribed, veyuchaku, in a book, Job 19:23. And it is Moses who is called the inscriber, as it is written with regard to him. And he provided the first part for himself, for there was the inscriber's mechokek, the inscriber's portion reserved in Deuteronomy 33:21. So Rava says, no. Job was not a contemporary so much of Moses. He was a little bit later. I mean, yes, Moses was alive, but really his story happens at the time of the spies whom Moses sent to scout the land of Canaan. And this is proven by the fact that it is written here, there was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. That's the beginning of the book of Job. And it is written there in the account of the spies that, asked for permission, and Moses sent them up to look at the land, and they brought back this terrible, scary report that sent the people into a panic. And it is written there in the account of the spies, quote, whether there are trees in it, right? Go up and see the land and let us know whether there are trees in it. Eitz. So eitz and utz are same root. And the Gemara says, is it comparable? Here, the word that was used is utz, whereas there it's eitz. Utz and eitz are not the same word. The Gemara answers, this is what Moses said to Israel, i.e. to the spies. Is that man named Job still alive? He whose years are as long as the years of a tree, and who protects his generation like a tree? This is why the allusion to him here is through the word eitz rather than utz, meaning Job, who was not Jewish, but was considered utterly righteous, right? And the book of Job is all about why would a righteous man suffer. He goes through all the tests, etc. But in the end, sort of like his life is, he lost a lot of family, but he got new family, and his life was somewhat restored at the end of the book of Job. And he lived for a long time, and his merit protected the people around him. So the idea here is, if Job was living in the land of Israel at the time that the spies were being sent up there, then it was going to be difficult to defeat the Canaanites. So that's why Moses, it's not expressly written in the Torah, obviously, but in this interpretation, Moses was asking, is that man Job of Uz still alive in Canaan? Now the Gemara relates, and I'm almost done, so questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara relates that one of the sages sat before Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, and he sat and he said, Job never existed and was never created. There never was such a person as Job. Rather, his story was a parable. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said to him, in rebuttal to you, the verse states there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, which indicates that such a man did indeed exist. It was not a parable. It didn't start with there was a man named Job who. It says there was a man in the name, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And when the Bible says something like that, it's referring to a real life incident, and there really was a man named Job. So the Gemara asks, but if that is so, that the words there was prove that Job existed, what shall we say about the parable that Nathan the prophet presented to King David, when he said there were two men in one city, one rich and the other poor, and the rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb, which he bought and reared. right? And it's, it was a parable meant to show David that what he did something bad when, he set his eyes on Bathsheba and sent her husband Uriah, to the front lines where he perished, right? So, the prophet was rebuking King David because he could have 1,000 wives. Why would he set his eyes on the wife of one of his soldiers? But that story that Nathan the prophet says to King David is obviously a parable. He's not talking about there's two men in the real world, one rich and one poor, and the rich one takes the one lamb of the poor guy to serve to his guests. That was a parable. Was there really, was there such a man? Rather, it was merely a parable. So here too, it is merely a parable. And the Gemara answer, meaning this is a counter argument to the one who said that Job was a real person, that also was a parable. And the Gemara answers, if so, if the story of Job is a parable, then why state his name and the name of his city? Utz. Rather, Job was clearly a real person. And the Gemara lets it go on that question. Job was a real person. When we pick it up tomorrow, God willing, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, we're going to continue with this fascinating discussion of when did Job live and was Job Jewish? Oh, wait a minute. How's my time? Oh, I was going to go a little further, but no. That's where we'll pick it up tomorrow. What I just said. Yes. Okay. All right. Questions. Bava Basra 14. Sharon. This quibbling about dimensions is a bit odd to me. I seem to have always read that God can enable things to fit as God desires, regardless of stated measures. And this was taught pretty succinctly about what would fit into the Mishkan. Right, and we also have the teaching that when we have the resurrection of the dead in the time of Mashiach, then all the Jews who ever lived throughout history, and that's many, many millions of people, there will be room for everybody in Israel, and there will be room for everybody to come worship at the third temple in Jerusalem. And how will there be room for so many people? Miraculous expansion. So that speaks to your point, Sharon. But, nevertheless, since dimensions were given and more dimensions could be deduced, so the rabbis are trying to deduce what is the ideal size of a Torah scroll, and that's what they were getting at. Jonathan, broken tablets, the Yishar Kochacha. I wonder if it is from here where we get the custom of saying Yashar Koach, right? May you be strengthened to someone after they have read from the Torah, or done a matter of Torah, or chanted the Haftarah, or right? Anytime that people do something that's a nice mitzvah or participate in a mitzvah, you say to them Yashar Koach. May you be strengthened. And what we mean is may you be strengthened, to do another mitzvah. May you be strengthened to read from the Torah again. May you be strengthened to, lead the prayers from the podium at the front. And perhaps that is related. Very nice. Tom, I thought Solomon wrote Mishlei. I thought so too. And I still do. But like I said, this was not the dispositive final answer on authorship, just like it wasn't the final answer on the order of the books in Tanakh. This was a view expressed in a Brisa that we're now exploring. And Ilanit, Shalom from Silver Spring, Maryland. What a daf! The famous list of authors of scripture. Amazing to see how long ago it was said that Moses wrote Job. Several theories, I guess, by Rabbi Schwab agree with Moses. Right. I mean, there's nothing simple, straightforward, about these questions. And we did say it along the way that it wasn't just Moses, taking dictation. Everyone, who merited to write one of the books that became part of Tanakh was either taking dictation from God or was certainly inspired, right? There was divine inspiration for that. These are not just regular books and memoirs and autobiographies, as it were. This is Holy Scripture, and it's not chance that things ended up there. And so, of course, there will be a certain, depth and mystery surrounding all these texts that we value, that we prize, that kind of mystery. And that's what I've got for us today. So with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, to continue asking, when did Job live? What era? And the answers are amazing, amazing.